Hey everyone, Steven here, and welcome to my little library of horrors. Sorry it's been a little while since I've uploaded. I unfortunately fell into a bit of a depression there, but that's nothing new, especially with the seasonal depression mixing in with the normal one, so, it is what it is. I think I'm starting to feel a little better, so I wanted to get this out. Especially with Thanksgiving being next week and everything, I'm going to be extremely busy traveling to visit family and all of that good stuff as per usual. So, wanted to leave a little something at least. I might try and get another one recorded before Thanksgiving next week, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But anyway, speaking of depression, back in high school, one thing that really helped me with that was reading manga, which is the Japanese comic form, essentially. I remember, I think it was my freshman year of high school. I joined the comic book club after school. And I'll never forget when the first time I went in, my science teacher at the time, he obviously led the group and he had his comics and everything. But then there was a group of kids at a different table who were trading different kinds of books. And when I went over to look, I had saw manga for the first time. Never heard of it, but I really enjoyed anime. I had loved anime for years at that point. So, but had never heard of manga before. So I'll never forget the very first manga I ever read was, I believe it's Jing, the King of Bandits, or King of Bandits Jing. I can't remember what order the title is, but it was just really awesome. Like, it was so confusing having to read right to left for the first time, but it was just such a cool experience, like being able to explore this different culture, and the story was just really good. So I kind of have been in love with manga ever since then. So after my last book that I read, Letters from the Dead, not really, being fantastic and quite frankly being pretty terrible, I tried to read another novel after, and it just wasn't clicking for me right then and there. So after doing my Zomtober video, I wanted to go back and revisit one of my favorite mangas from back in the day, I Am a Hero, by Kengo Hanazawa. So I am more than likely going to butcher a lot of pronunciations in this video, so I really do apologize for that. Japanese is obviously not my native language, but I will do my best to pronounce it the way I have maybe heard it before, or the best that I can. But yeah, before I get into the video, I just ask that you drop a quick like on it, as it helps push the video out into the algorithm and gets it out to more eyes to view. And plus it's a free way to help support the channel, so I'd really appreciate that. Anyway, I Am a Hero by Kengo Hanazawa was first published in 2009, which was serialized in a magazine series called Big Comic Spirits over in Japan. It was then eventually transcribed and published by Dark Horse in 2016, hence why we have the English serialized novels and omnibuses that we do now. So essentially, I Am a Hero is a zombie novel that turns more into post-apocalyptic as the story goes on. But what really makes this one stand out more than anything is that our main character here, Hideo Suzuki, he suffers from paranoid hallucinations. So that's sort of our first introduction to him. We see Hideo going into his house, and he has this almost strange ritual that he has to do in order to enter the house. He checks over his shoulder to make sure no one's watching, and all of that. And he does this weird dance, essentially. And as he gets in, we start to get a little more of who he is. We see that he has, I think it's like 8 or 9 locks behind his door. Again, has this sort of strange ritual he has to do before he enters his house. And, we essentially get to see how eccentric he is as a person. So And then as the story goes on a little bit further, we get, this song happens to come on, and that, for whatever reason, seems to trigger his hallucination. And it's so interesting seeing how that starts to happen with him. I'll go ahead and I'll actually show a couple panels here about how it starts. It's so eerie. It's very, very eerie how he's sort of like, oh no, it's starting here. So, let me see here. So yeah, so he goes to peep through the peephole here in his apartment. Oh no, that's a little bit further. Let's see. Well, here's one where he turns off the TV on his television, and then just a little face appears there. And then I'll try to get to where there's the peephole. He looks through the peephole, and he sees, the little, again, another face in the door. But yeah, he starts to break out into like this Buddhist chant to try and ward off the hallucinations, the spirits. And this is actually one more I really want to show. I always show this panel just because it really freaks me out, like just how the body is proportioned there seems really strange. Let me see if I can get just a bit of a better focus here. There we go. Much better focus. But yeah, it's really disturbing just to see the imagery itself, like, is very unsettling. One hallucination that Hideo has is his imaginary friend, Yajima. And Yajima is like I said, his imaginary friend, but he's sort of this almost Igor to his Frankenstein. He is very much... Hideo feels very incompetent in his normal life, so Yajima is sort of this person he feels superior to, but not in a way where he, it like mocks him or makes Yajima feel like an idiot, but more so Yajima inflates Hideo's ego in saying, oh yeah, I didn't think of that, you're so smart, and da-da-da. So, it's really interesting, but as the story unfolds, we start to see Yujima's not all that Hideo has imagined him to be. We start to see like these very, very subtle and small questionings against Hideo, which he's not used to from Yajima. He's very much used to Yajima being a yes man, because obviously he created him. So as we start to see these little subtle pushbacks, that's another layer of eeriness to the story that I really enjoy. So as that's happening, it's just really nice. It's a good layer of eeriness to the story. After that, a little later on, we get to see Hideo at his job. He's a manga artist or a mangaka. And to Hideo, manga is essentially the pinnacle of Japanese culture. He believes it's the ultimate form of expression, and is, by and large, probably the most difficult art form there is. Which, obviously there's gonna be debate on that, hands down. I don't think there's any one expression of art that is more difficult than the other, ultimately. But I can see his argument for manga, like, it's all hand-drawn to this day. So it's very, very demanding, very grueling, and that's what makes why manga is so infrequently published, constantly taking hiatus. Like, one of my favorite and most well-known mangas, Berserk, the original writer had recently passed within the past few years, and the story's still going. But there's one panel, it's 2 pages, but I remember he had said it taken him a year and a half just to make those 2 pages that didn't even convey story. It was just a cityscape, and it's beautiful. It's so incredible. So I can see where Hideo's coming from, but he sort of goes off on this tangent, but it's all in his head. He never actually says any of this out loud, but the way that the author of the story like makes Hideo such an unreliable narrator, in that we can never tell what's actually happening within the story and what's in his head. It doesn't make it feel disjarring where like the story doesn't suck me in. As a matter of fact, it actually draws me in more, because it's like, when danger's present, it feels so real. But then as we sort of see, this scene in particular was a hallucination. Not that there was any danger, but again, it further drives us into Hideo's mind and builds a better connection with our character. So within the studio, we get introduced to another character, Mr. Maitani, who's this very overly perverted, very, typical, cliche, perverted Japanese character that's often within manga in these kind of series. But Hideo essentially like can't stand the guy. It feels like he doesn't represent what a manga artist should be. And in the beginning, it's funny because Mr. Maitani is, like I said, very cliche in that he's so heavily focused on sex and women and things like that, hitting on the girls in the office and things like that. Excuse me. But he goes into this awesome character arc later, which I'll go into a little bit later as the story unfolds. So yeah, I really enjoy seeing Hideo at work. Like I said, it adds another layer of depth to his character, why he is the way that he is. And it introduces sort of one of the main interesting and frankly unique traits to the story is Hideo is one of the very few people in all of Japan to own a firearm. Their gun control laws are incredibly strict, so you have to go through a very strict testing, and I believe renew your license every year in order to own a firearm. So, it's a really cool element to see that, once the zombie apocalypse starts happening, it's this really cool element. Like, it's typical within any zombie story. There's this mass cache of weapons and guns and things like that. Oftentimes because zombie stories take place in America. So to see one take place where gun control is incredibly strict, it just adds this brand new element that's really exciting and turns this very boring and typical part of a zombie story and flips it on its head into this brand new, fresh idea, which I love. So, after that, we get into introduced to yet another character, and easily one of my favorite characters in the story, Hideo's girlfriend, Tetsuko Kurokawa. Yes, I have these names written down because there's absolutely no way I'm remembering these off the top of my head. But, it's one of my favorite parts of the story is the relationship between Hideo and Tetsuko. Their relationship is so genuine and fun, but like not in the typical way of everything seems so rainbow and sunshine. We get to see not a lot, but like we get to see some turbulence in their relationship that feels natural. It doesn't feel forced at all. So, excuse me. Tetsuko comes off as this very, sort of quirky girl, a little maybe meek at first glance, but very quirky, very, you can tell they're best friends. It's the best way I can put it. They joke a lot, but they're able to have serious conversations with each other as well. And like, one of the biggest things is Hideo feels inadequate to Tetsuko's ex, Nakata, because Nakata became this very successful manga artist, and he's this very exciting guy, very eccentric, definitely has sort of that bad boy element, but also like completely reminds me of Weird Al Yankovic in a way. But it feeds into Hideo's insecurity, which is, it kind of encompasses the whole title of the story. I am a hero. Hideo wants to. He doesn't even feel like the main character in his life, and that's what he wants. He wants to feel important in his own life, but he has all of these elements that make him feel like a supporting character. Like I said in this instance with Tetsuko mentioning her ex, like how his new manga is fantastic and that Hideo should read it, but she says it in a way to. She wants to inspire Hideo. She says, I really feel like this would help your own manga. And it's nice to just, see how she handles Hideo's insecurity with that. He eventually breaks down and is like, straight up asks her, have you been sleeping with your ex? And she says, no. And like, but she doesn't get angry, she takes a moment of self-reflection, being like, okay, maybe I have been sort of pushing my ex's manga too hard in hopes of, excuse me, inspiring Hideo, but I've been, I guess, maybe pushing him away or making him feel inferior. So, but it's just kind of nice to see that not only acceptance of her, but the vulnerability and the strength of Hideo to open up about that insecurity. So, instead of it continuing to fester and affecting their relationship, they're able to just talk it out and accept it. And, she does this wonderful gesture of throwing away all of her ex's manga on her bookshelf and solely having Hideo's manga on her shelf, which I understand. I think it's a really sweet gesture and everything like that, but I also kind of feel it's a little toxic of Hideo at the same point to make her feel like that she needs to do that, But again, it's a little minor thing. But after that, we start to get into Tetsuko's backstory, and we see that she was this wild girl that, like, she admired Hideo because of the uniqueness of his manga. So to see how they first met and started to build this relationship, I'm a hopeless romantic, I can't help it. But so, like, it was really sweet and just very romantic to see how their relationship budded. And, to sort of see this growth within Tetsuko, she, I said when we're first introduced, she seems very sweet and mild and everything, but, she ends up drinking and her drunk side comes out, and then we start to see this, very aggressive and in your face Tetsuko that, was from her younger days, but is still very much there. So, it's a really sweet scene that I love. So yeah, again, as the story progresses, things happen. I can't go too much into detail of it without getting spoilery. But it's when we start to see the zombie apocalypse start to unfold. Hideo walks home and he sees this girl get hit by a car and starts to get up and walk away. And it's this awesome, just really, really awesome, like, scene of a zombie. Like, I'll see if I can find it here. Of a zombie walking away from the scene, but it's just so the imagery in this manga is so disturbing, and I just love it. Like, the way that everything is presented, the way the zombies look, it's so cool. I can't show that part, obviously. But, I can't find it, but I will show you some of the zombies action here. Oh, yeah, see, like that's pretty sweet there. That's a pretty gnarly scene. Yeah, I get eaten. But it's really interesting. I love how the zombie apocalypse starts to unfold sort of in the background. Like, you know what I mean? It's making Hideo the main character of the story, but these scenes are happening around him that he's like almost oblivious to, where, you know, we see people being attacked, and it's just so cool. Like, you know what I mean? It almost feels kind of slapstick in a way, where he's like so in his own head, where he's unaware of the things going on, but obviously us as a reader are just like, holy crap, how is he like, dude, literally just turn your head and look what's going on. So it's like, again, it's this wonderful almost feeling of slapstick, but also builds tension and excitement within the reader. So yeah, there's just a lot of build-up, and as we start to build the zombies in themselves, we see that there's almost this layer of lasting humanity within them, because they talk, and it seems to me, it's never truly confirmed, but it seems to me that the zombies are repeating the last remnants of their thoughts that's mixed in with this ravenous undead hunger. So it's really interesting to see that, you know, while they're zombies, there's also this very, you know, sort of disturbing layer of humanity still lasting within there. You know, like one zombie that chases Hideo just says, rent money, and she was the landlord of the apartments. So, it's just, like I said, it's just really neat detail to add to the zombies that makes them feel more, for lack of a better word, fleshed out. You know, they're not just this mindless, you know, eating machine. There's that layer of humanity to them that I think also boosts the element of horror to the story. You know, we're not just killing the undead. There very well may still be some sort of consciousness within them. So we eventually get to this great scene where Hideo goes back to the studio and he runs into Mr. Maitani. And they have this epic scene with a zombie in there that leads to probably one of the coolest zombie killing scenes I have ever seen within any zombie media. It is just the way it's presented, it's the way it unravels, and just the execution of it is so cool. I'm not going to show it because you just have to see it for yourself. But it's also this really wonderful scene where Mr. Matani starts to get more character. You know, he starts to essentially reveal his own inner insecurities, where he felt inferior to the director-in-chief of the studio, where he was sleeping with an intern that Mr. Maitani was interested in. But, you know, that's actually one of the scenes, is the director-in-chief turns into a zombie, and that's where Mr. Maitani comes in, we see him essentially kill the zombie director, but in this incredibly violent manner that it's not just a matter of survival, but this feeling of letting the beast out, this feeling of relief and anger and frustration at him for, you know, we see him just like, bam, he has a baseball bat, he's just boom, boom, and he's just venting these frustrations, and Hideo's just like, holy cow. So, you know, I think it again is another excellent way of turning a very cliche character and blooming them into their own personality, into an interesting character that's not so two-dimensional. It starts to add that 3D level to him. So it's just a wonderful scene, wonderful scene. And so then, we're starting to get into, essentially the ending of the story where there's this death that happens. Again, probably one of the most unique death scenes I've ever seen in zombie media. And it's like, you think it's going to go one way. Like, the way it happens, you're just like, oh, crap. Like, I have a feeling how this is going to go. Nope. I would bet every dollar I ever make in my life, you will never see it coming. And it's just like, it literally makes you almost drop the book in a way. Like, whoa, didn't see that coming. But it's impactful. It's awesome. You don't see it coming. It's just so good. So yeah, as the story ends, Hideo gets onto a train, and, things are starting to pick up a little bit more on the apocalypse side wise, where, it's starting to hit the news. There's, major cities are starting to see what's going on. The director of health of the country has, died and things like that. So, but again, it's really interesting because it starts to, seeds that were planted in the middle of the story I can't discuss because it's a spoiler, start to blossom into these flowers of foreshadowing. And again, it really adds this level of heartbreak, of tragedy, and shock, because it's the scene that, like I said, that plants these seeds, makes you think, is like, that's interesting. But then as it explains it in this, you're like, oh my God, whoa, it's this gut punch that just completely tore my heart out. Genuinely, like, I was just like, oh my God. And, but the very last panel, I want to show the last panel here, because it's technically not a spoiler, but the way it ends is like such a good cliffhanger that, you know what I mean? It sort of brings you back from that emotional, like, trench you were in to, like, oh man, that's right. I forgot about this. But you see, we see Hideo here, he says, oh, my gun. And that's how the story ends. And it's like, oh crap, that's right, his gun. I forgot. He's one of the very few people in this country that own a gun. So yeah, I think that's just such a great way to end the first book and really make the reader want to go out and get the second one. I think genuinely one of the best things this book does is show what I feel the zombie subgenre's biggest strength is, and that is, when done correctly, you can mash every genre into this and have it work. It doesn't have to strictly be a horror story. You can have horror, you can have comedy, you can have drama, you can have action. You can have all of these other genres placed within it, excuse me, and elevate this story into this wonderful blend that just, sort of breaks the barriers of a singular genre. And I think I Am a Hero does that beautifully and seamlessly. Like I said, the story's pacing is a little slow in the beginning. I will say that, but it does a really good job of keeping the reader interested in the characters and what's going on, even though it takes a little bit to get to the action of the zombies and everything. But I love that it's not so heavily focused on the brutality and the gruesomeness of a zombie apocalypse, but also the human tragedy and mental toll that that kind of situation takes on people. Um, so yeah, overall, I give I Am a Hero a definite 5 out of 5. It is such a beautifully told story. It made me laugh. I almost cried, and I was completely invested the entire way through. And there's just so many awesome surprises within this, just the very first book, that I can't help but recommend that anyone go out and run this. Read this. Whether you're a fan of comics, of zombies, of horror, or if you just want a genuine palate cleanser from novels overall. I think I Am a Hero is a really, really good beginning step into the wonderful world of manga and the vast amount of stories that lie within that medium. But that's going to be it for me today, everyone. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Go ahead and leave a comment down below and let me know one of your favorite zombie books ever. But until next time, everyone, be kind to yourselves, and I'll see you later. Bye.